Welcome to Scrolling to Death. Today I have a very special guest, Rick Lane, who is a tech policy expert, a child safety advocate, and founder and CEO of IGGY Ventures. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you for having me, Nikki.
You're so welcome. Tell me about IGGY Ventures. I keep wanting to say IGGY Adventures. Tell me about IGGY Ventures.
Yeah, so I created IGGY Ventures after I left News Corp for 16 years. I was their senior vice president, focusing on domestic policy, mostly around tech. And for that, I was at the U.S. Chamber. But when I left, I wanted to do something entrepreneurial, but also stay within the public policy realm. So I created IGGY Ventures. IGGY is short for St. Ignatius, who was the founder of the Jesuits. I went to Holy Cross, and IGGY was our name of our mascot. So I decided that I wanted the name to reflect what the goals of the company were, and men and women for others. And so that's how I came up with IGGY Ventures. So I invest in companies, I advise companies, I use it in my volunteer on child safety advocacy. And so it's really the place I house my business.
Okay, amazing. And we've been integrated on LinkedIn for a while, but I got to meet you in person and see you speak at the Nicosi Summit in DC last month. So I ran over to you after and I was like, we need to talk. And then you're like, we've already connected on LinkedIn. I was like, it's hard to sometimes put the headshot on social media to the face in person. But I'm really excited to have this conversation because you've had a front row seat to the evolution of both the tech companies and social media companies, and also the legislation that continually fails to protect our kids online. So if we could just start with, Rick, how did we get here where kids can go online really at any age and get access to some of the worst content and the worst people in the world, and there's really nothing parents can do about it? How do we get here?
How do we get there? I kind of blame myself for that because I was part of that back in the day. So how we got here was really a public policy initiative and philosophy that started in the Clinton administration, which was light touch of government and self-regulatory control, which at the time made a lot of sense. This is the time of America Online and CompuServe and Prodigy. And so a lot of the issues that we're seeing today were not relevant back then, but the goal of the public policy initiative was let's self-regulate, we can move more quickly, and we'll be able to implement safety mechanisms. Hence, you saw Section 230, CDA 230. And all these things were around privacy, and everything else was going to be in a much more hands-off government and working and trying to let competition compete in terms of child protection. And AOL was a big advocate of this, and as I said, and others. And the philosophy was a utopian philosophy. It was like, let's try to do this differently than we've done in the past. And there was a lot of buy-in. And that's what started with, the 96 Telecom Act with Section 230, the 1998 privacy bill, with COPPA, with Ed Markey, more focusing on children. And then in terms of privacy in general and oversight was like, we're going to all work together and create coalitions and put mechanisms in place to do the right thing. But that went off the rails, really, with Meta and Google, who came after all this. Yahoo was a good player. AOL, they were good companies. But when the new kids on the block came in, it really disrupted what we had all really thought would be a great way to move forward in this space.
Yeah. Wasn't there a case or two in early 2000s that sort of set the precedent for this shielding liability? And one was versus America Online. Were you familiar with those?
Yeah, there were a bunch of cases that started with Section 230, and then with the first case that really started having 230 go in the wrong direction. Because you have to remember, it was CDA, the child, it was all about protecting children, right? Communications Decency Act. It wasn't the Protect America Online Act. And so the legislation, as I said, we thought is what we wanted to do is make sure that companies would take proactive steps to monitor their sites and take bad content down, which is a very important part of CDA 230, because at the time, if you had knowledge of harmful activities on the site, then you could be potentially held accountable because you have knowledge of harm. So what we wanted to try to do was create an incentive for companies like AOL and others to be able to proactively monitor the site and make it more family friendly without being held responsible.
Mm-hmm.
But the flip side was that there was nothing in there to incentivize companies to be proactive. So they got the benefits of the protections without the obligations of taking the necessary steps to try to fix the problems. And that's what we're trying to do now with modifying Section 230 is to have, yes, we want you to be proactive. At the same time, if you're doing nothing, then we're going, you don't get these protections. It's like the Earn It Act is that philosophy.
And they're taking it a step further by proactively suggesting harmful content within algorithms to children.
That's right.
So not only not removing it, but pushing it.
Yes. I mean, that's what changed. I think, when things started to really go badly, I was a point person when News Corp bought MySpace. So we were the first big social networking site, MySpace was, and we worked really hard to clean it up. My partners and I, who were involved in the child safety side, Himanshu Nigam, I hired him because Ernie Allen, who was the CEO of NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, I asked him, who's the best person I can hire to help us fix MySpace and make it more safe for our younger users? And he said Himanshu Nigam. So we've become very good friends. I laugh now because I said, if you knew that you were my only pick, you could have asked for a lot more money when we hired you. But we really worked hard and we wanted to make MySpace safe. And we also had the authority to do that from our CEO, from Rupert Murdoch. I mean, we were able to go into MySpace and say, you can't roll out this product or this functionality because it's going to harm children. And if they push back, we say, okay, talk to Rupert. And they would never do that. But we had that authority. At the same time, we were watching Facebook move fast and break things. And so all these harms that we were watching, we were telling then Attorney General Bloomberg and then Attorney General from North Carolina, the current governor, we were telling them Facebook's a mess. And they're, oh, well, you're the big guys on the street. You're whatever you do, they'll follow. And we were like working hard to clean up. Our business people weren't happy with us, but we wanted to do the right thing. And Facebook just kept doing what was the wrong thing to do. We knew it. We could see it. They were competitors. We had the research, yet they got away with it and they never followed. So all the issues that are happening now on Facebook, we knew back in 2008, 2009. There's been no change. So this is nothing new.
And I spoke with Facebook whistleblower David Erb last week, and he explained that when he was at YouTube, they talked about, so an example of kind of what you're saying is they talked about doing live video. So live streaming video, and it was supposed to be, at the time, there was cops who were doing bad things, and so it was sort of like a bystander. You could start a live video, capture it, and it's already out there. And they decided after reflecting that this is going to be a problem, especially for children, because people are going to live stream violence and suicides and murders and all these things. So they nixed it. But then shortly after, Facebook just added it, knowing the harm and knowing the risk without
we nixed
prioritizing that.
Yeah, we nixed it too at MySpace. No, we had that conversation. We were like, we can't do this because of the harm. And so we didn't roll it out either. In our business, people were not happy because it was like, got to make it sticky. You're going to get advertisement. And we're like, but what happens when it gets used for evil and children are being harmed live? How are we going to deal with that? And they didn't have an answer. So we didn't roll it out.
Well, that's so hard to monitor live stream video.
It's impossible.
Right. Okay. That's a great example of, and Meta is just the worst. And I know TikTok has live video as well, live streaming, and that's where a lot of kids are seeing live murders and live suicides.
It's not just the live, it's the replaying of it. I mean, there's one father whose daughter was murdered live. She was a reporter in Virginia, and he constantly still fighting takedowns of her being murdered. So it's not just when it happens live, it just stays up. And you don't have any recourse to get these entities to take it down. So imagine that as a parent, you're trying to take this stuff down and they're just saying, nope, we're not going to do it.
And that's a choice, Rick, because the AI technology exists to scan an entire platform, find duplicates of a piece of content and pull it down. And so they're leaving it up because it's probably got a ton of views and they're making money off of it.
It doesn't matter what the reason is, they're just doing it.
Yeah.
And that's
Right.
wrong.
Yes.
There is no good
Sure.
reason, right?
Right.
Money
Right.
or whatever it happens to be, inconvenience,
Yeah.
cost, whatever it is, they're doing it. And that just is why, as someone who was very active in the self-regulatory world of
Mm-hmm.
the internet in the early days, I've really worked hard to focus on legislation that helps keep and hold these sites accountable, because
Mm-hmm.
we tried to do it the right way, and
Mm-hmm.
other companies took advantage of that. And so now we have to have more regulation to ensure that there is a cost of doing business when you're
Mm-hmm.
creating products and services that create harm.
Right. Okay. And I want to talk about that legislation in a moment, but because I'm curious, what happened to MySpace?
Oh, well, some of the business people blame us because we weren't letting them, move fast and break things, right? There's part
Uh-huh.
of that.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
my personal view of what happened with MySpace was we made a really bad deal with Google.
Mm-hmm.
We did a deal where Google became the search engine and could sell remnant ads. It was a $900 million deal. And when I saw that, they didn't consult me on it because I would have said no. But when I
Mm-hmm.
saw that deal, I said, we just basically gave MySpace to Google because, one, they're going to have all the information on search, right? So they're going to be able to combine across all the websites that they already control. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
most people don't realize Safari is a Chrome search engine, right? It's owned by Google.
Really?
Yes,
I
Safari.
didn't know
Yeah,
that.
that's Google pays billions of dollars to Apple to be its search engine.
Wow. Okay. Didn't know.
Yeah, that's part of the antitrust litigation.
I'm like, I'm not using that Google app. I'm just going to use Safari because it's
Yeah, no,
default on my phone. It's the
it's still
same.
part of
Oh
Chrome.
God. Okay.
Now there may be there's some information that Google doesn't get
Mm-hmm.
because, or Alphabet, whatever you want to call it, doesn't
Mm-hmm.
get because of the deal, but they're paying Apple a ton of money.
Mm.
And they're not doing that because they want to give Apple a ton of money. There's some
Right.
obviously tremendous amount of benefit. So,
Yeah.
and that's what they did. Like if you go to, again, this may be old information, but like Xfinity, if you search on Xfinity, that's Chrome. So they have a lot of the search engine bars that most people don't realize are not, the entities are there. And that's how they get more and more information. So my argument was that not only is Google going to get all information on MySpace users and all their interactions, but also they're selling remnant ads. Remnant ads are the ads that are placed on a page that don't sell by the company itself. So they're like fillers that come in. And so my argument was that if Google has the remnant ads and the search, and I'm trying to be a MySpace ad sales, and I go to Coca-Cola and say, oh, spend $1 million on MySpace to advertise Coke. And Google comes in and says, spend $1 million on Google ads. And not only will you be on MySpace, but you'll be on 1,000 other websites.
Whoops.
And know who didn't do that was Facebook. This is one of the things. So Microsoft tried to get the same deal with Facebook. They invested early investors in Facebook, and they wanted Bing to become the search engine. And Zuckerberg and the team were smart enough to say, no way. That's the data is the oil, that's going to fuel our business. And we're not going to give it away to Microsoft. The folks at MySpace, I don't think were sophisticated enough at the time to understand the power of data and what it meant to hold your own data.
Speak more about the power of the data. What is the value of the data that we're giving up for free to use these platforms?
It's targeted advertising, right? It's knowing what you like and being able to specifically tell an advertiser that you're hitting the demographics that you want. So in traditional media, which I was very much part of on the Fox side, right? Fox Television and the cable channels, when you're selling advertisements, you're selling it to how many eyeballs you have, right? We have this many eyeballs, and a good percentage of those eyeballs like beer, right? So we're going to do beer ads, or watch football, right? And we can sell. It's contextual around sort of the demographic of the audience, and then you get that demographic from Nielsen ratings, right? And they say, okay, so and that's how you pitch traditional media around contextual advertising. When Google came in and with Meta and the online sites, they said, we can do targeted advertising. So what that means is we can target people who are interested specifically in the product that you're trying to sell based on 1,000 different factors. And so I'm watching a show on YouTube. I will see different ads than Nikki, than you will, right? Based on our preferences of what we like. And that is very powerful because the old line in the advertising world was 50% of your advertising dollars are wasted. The problem is you don't know which 50%. And so Google and Meta and then Amazon and the other companies could say, we can predict better of what people are interested because we have so much more data than traditional television, traditional media, newspapers, classifieds. You're not just blasting it to everybody, hoping that some people watch it. You're targeting it to those who are quite interested. But that also became the problem because online media was the lowest basis. And the horrible analogy I will use is that, if I'm interested in selling, a product, I don't care if the people are bad or good, as long as they're interested in the product.
Right.
So, and if I can generate eyeballs because it's horrible content of things that you and I would not like to see online, but it's generating a tremendous amount of eyeballs, then I will run that. And that's what's going to help me make more money versus traditional media.
And something I reported on this morning was that Meta is boosting through ad dollars ads for Nudify apps.
Yes.
Ads for illicit drugs, ads for fake driver's licenses, ads for counterfeit money. Like they're making money off of illegal activities. How is that allowed to happen?
I was interviewed for an article in the Washington Post in 2018 on this issue. And so this is nothing. This is back to the MySpace days. It's sort of, they say we can target ads and we have all this information, yet somehow they can't stop illegal drug sales. And it's even worse than that because the way I describe it is that if you look at illegal drug sales and you'll hear from Meta and Reddit is also, and then these other entities, TikTok, they say, well, that's not the normal user. They don't normally see advertisements. And I say, well, that's probably true because I don't know where the drug dealers are in my area. But if I was a drug addict, I bet I know where they all are. Right. And what happens with the algorithms is that people like to describe these algorithms as rabbit holes, right? You kind of go down. And what I say is that they are basically black holes. They suck you in until you can no longer see the light. And they're able to, all of a sudden you are interested. Your eyes may have watched a illegal drug ad for a little too long or what they're doing. And they're able to target you. And then more and more, and this is what these reports show, is all of a sudden I'm getting hundreds of illegal drug ads. Right? Because I've now shown an interest and the algorithm is pouring that into me. And if I have a drug problem, that's basically, it's the same type of thing, right? It's sort of, I need more and more and more. And the algorithms basically work like an addictive drug.
Yeah, for sure. And they withhold, who shared this with me? Josh Golan at Fair Play. He said that TikTok, it'll withhold a video that they know you're really going to love until they get an indication that you're going to leave the app. And then they hit that video so that it keeps you on.
Well, as you may know, Nikki, I helped lead the effort on the TikTok divestiture legislation.
Yes.
So I have a lot of research data of the power of their algorithms and what they're able to do to manipulate people, not just young people, but people of all ages. And you're seeing that power in a geopolitical way. I mean, just today, the attorney general went after a company in Tennessee because of the media that they were providing misinformation and disinformation for the election. So our adversaries know this power. They know that the algorithms will take people to very dark places and they're utilizing it against our own national interests. But companies like Facebook and others, their algorithms are harming our children and they know it. And yet they're not willing to take the necessary steps to help prevent it.
Right. And that applies across all platforms, but TikTok is unique in that it is owned by a Chinese company. And so if we can talk about TikTok for a moment,
Mhm.
in April, the National Security Act passed that requires TikTok to be sold to an American company, or we will remove it from our app stores here in the US. Then in May, TikTok sued our US government, I
Mhm.
assume that's the right, to try to overturn the law based on First Amendment rights.
Correct.
There's been additional legal action since then. So if you can bring people up to speed on this
Mhm.
and why it is so important that we get a handle on TikTok.
Sure. So the divestiture bill is not a ban bill, as TikTok tries to claim. It's a
Right.
divestiture bill, and it doesn't have to be an American company. It just can't be a company that is based in an adversarial nation. So it
Okay.
comes down to China, Iran, North Korea, that type
Okay.
of company. So it could be a UK company, it could be an Australian company, it could be any
Got it.
company.
Hmm.
So it doesn't have to be an American company. And the problem is that, and the way the legislation is designed, they're trying to claim, TikTok is claiming its First Amendment. This is
Hmm.
not about the content of the site. You can
Hmm.
see, this country has a very strong First Amendment, awful but lawful, as we like to say.
Hmm.
It's very hard. And we've seen that with some of the court cases on child protection. But
Hmm.
this is about an entity that has connections to the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP,
Hmm.
and they have a philosophy, the CCP, of utilizing social media to disrupt our democracy, to undermine our democracy. And they
Hmm.
have a tool of, with their phones in 170 million Americans' hands, that
Hmm.
they know our likes and dislikes and what will tick us off. That's my line, right?
Hmm.
and
Yeah.
and how to generate division. And
Hmm.
so at a critical time in a geopolitical situation, let's say the invasion of Taiwan, they're able to create unrest in areas that could be detrimental to our national interests. And so
Okay.
it's a national security issue of the ability of using an algorithm
Hmm.
as a weapon against the United States of America. So it's not a free speech issue, it's a conduct issue. It's an issue of utilizing a technological tool that can undermine our democracy and our national security.
And a new study, and I wonder what your thoughts are, by NCRI and I think Rutgers showed
Mhm.
that TikTok psychologically manipulates users in favor of China. So, can you speak to that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very familiar with the study. And what it shows is that on issues like Tiananmen Square or the Dalai Lama, or in
Hmm.
other areas that are geopolitical, Kashmir is another one that's really fascinating. That
Hmm.
the videos that people are seeing are more likely, not just more likely, highly likely, percentage wise, to be on the side of the Chinese position on those issues than a
Hmm.
50-50 split. And
Hmm.
what the research has shown is that, like, if it's social issues like Taylor Swift, right? And you
Hmm.
have Instagram and TikTok, it's usually 50-50. Even political, like Democrats and Republican, is around 50-50. On
Hmm.
other geopolitical issues, the numbers just get sometimes 20 to 1, 100 to 1, and it's just unprecedented. And they've documented that using TikTok's own data, which once they started using the tool that TikTok had, TikTok shut it
Uh-huh.
down 3 days after the report came down. And so
That
they're
happens every
not
time.
using the tool the right way.
Right. I mean, this Center for Countering Digital Hate, Imran Ahmed, they published a study
Mhm.
showing us the number of eating disorder hashtags, for example, on
Right,
TikTok. And then, like, the next day, that number was gone. You couldn't find it.
right.
So
Yeah, they
we should know that.
Yeah, I mean, part of the thing, and this is the difference, and Reels has this problem now too. But
Hmm.
the way to think about it is, when we all started joining like Facebook, I only
Hmm.
saw posts of my friends, right? It's sort of like, if
Hmm.
I'm a friend with you, I'll see your post and you'll see mine.
Hmm.
And it's really kind of contained. But then
Yeah.
when you got to Instagram, it was follower. So if I follow you, I would see
Hmm.
your post. If I didn't
Hmm.
follow you and follow someone else, I would see their post.
Hmm.
What TikTok has created that Reels is now trying to replicate is they're sending what they think you want, which means that they can send you what they want.
Right.
So it becomes a 1 to a million or 1 to 170 million, but I can
Mhm.
target each individual with what will move that, which will move the dial. I mean,
Yeah.
the movie, The Social Dilemma, if
Yeah.
you think about that documentary, and in the hands of a foreign adversary, being able to turn the dial just enough to create doubt and chaos
Mhm.
in a democracy, it's scary. And
Yeah.
so, and we have the evidence that that dial is being turned, and we can't wait for it to be in a crisis situation and say, oh my gosh, TikTok is being used by the CCP, because there's never going to be a smoking gun per se, but there's
Mhm.
going to be, it's being used, and therefore we try to shut down, and by then it's too late. And
Mhm.
so what the national security folks in the US and around the Australians and UK and
Mhm.
Europeans all know is that the power of the algorithm of
Mhm.
TikTok in the hands of the CCP, and where the power of decision making is,
Mhm.
creates the national security threat.
Got it. Yeah. And to bring this down to be more relevant to parents who are listening, the psychological manipulation of that algorithm, it applies, and from what I'm seeing in my conversations with teenagers and with parents and everybody in between, they're creating a divide between the child and the parent. They're saying it's like TikTok wants the kids to trust TikTok for information, to guide their decisions, and not go to their parents and not rely on their parents or their teachers, or trust them. So it's like this, it's like they're putting a wedge between the family unit, even. Do
Yeah,
you have any opinion on that?
I think this is the two things that really scared me during the legislative fight
Mm-hmm.
was, one, when TikTok used the power of its platform to have 14-year-olds calling members of Congress and the Commerce Committee and
Mm-hmm.
telling them, that they were going to kill the members or kill themselves if the
Mm-hmm.
legislation was enacted. That just,
Right.
I was in the offices. I was with some of the Commerce Committee staffers when their bosses were in the classified briefing when this was happening, and it was
Yeah.
bizarre. I mean, it was incredibly
They,
scary to watch
because
that
Rick,
happen.
am I right that they weren't letting the kids onto the app until they clicked the call button?
Yes, to call the members, and they didn't know what they were talking about. And they're like, "You're going to take
Yeah.
away my TikTok, and I'm going to find your family." I mean, it was bizarre, but it backfired because as the members of Congress and the Commerce Committee were getting a briefing by the national security apparatus about
Mhm.
the harms of TikTok, it was happening real time back in their offices. So they come back and
Right.
our staff is like, oh my gosh, like I was
Yeah.
kind of hesitant before, like where you should be, but this is scary. This is really, and they were targeting the specific Commerce Committee. So it wasn't like every member. And
They were
so
geofencing by
by
location,
location, by
and
geolocation.
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like
And it
using
was,
kids to do their political bidding. Like,
no, absolutely. Absolutely. And so that part of it is truly, truly scary. And then, as I said, the power of the algorithm to divide. The other
mhm.
thing that really was scary is when you would hear young people say, well, there's no difference that the Chinese government has my data than the American government.
Mhm.
And I was like, do you know there's no free speech in China, right? There
Mhm.
is a difference between the US. We
Yeah.
have a Fourth Amendment here that if the US government is collecting data, that they could be in violation of our Constitution. And yes, sometimes they overstep their bounds. And
Mhm.
then, yes, they can be held accountable. But in China, they can just knock on your door and take you away.
Wow.
And so it's not the same, but the image that they're being projected on TikTok is, oh, this China is great, and they don't, all this rhetoric that you hear around the Dalai Lama or Tiananmen Square or
Mhm.
the Uyghurs and all those types of issues, they don't really exist. That's just
Mhm.
made up Western propaganda, and kids are
So,
believing it because they don't know any
y
better.
yeah. Well, they believe 30-second videos. They think they that's their
Information.
opinion is based
The
off of,
the
yeah.
other thing that we were able to show also is
Yeah.
that 40% of under the age of 24 get their quote news from TikTok.
Mhm. The amount of misinformation and disinformation that they're thinking is real is concerning.
Yes. Yeah. Because they think it's their news. I think it's real news.
Yeah. Okay. So to close out on TikTok, should parents let their kids use TikTok?
No, they should not. And I think it's also horrible that US businesses are promoting TikTok and political campaigns. I think the fact
Mm-hmm.
that both presidential candidates are on TikTok when the US Congress and the administration has deemed TikTok a national security threat through legislation, and these politicians are still on it, I think is horrendous, because they may argue, well, we're going to see how the legislation goes, in the courts. The courts are determining, is the legislative fix constitutional? But the
Uh-huh.
decision that TikTok is a threat to our national security was made by the vote
Yeah.
and the signing of the bill.
Right.
So this may not, we may lose in court. It's always a possibility. I don't think we will. I think we have better
Mm-hmm.
arguments. But
Mm-hmm.
the determination is that because TikTok is a national security threat, here is the remedy that we can get through to help fix the national security threat. And the fact that you
Mm-hmm.
have businesses like Amazon just doing a big deal called Handshake with TikTok to selling products on TikTok, or you have a local news organizations follow us on TikTok, I just think is crazy. And
Yeah.
I think that is a shame that they're putting profits ahead of our national security.
Yeah. Yikes. Okay. That was an aha moment for me. I didn't think about it that way. Okay. Really quick before we get into the bills that we want to talk about, what do you think about the arrest of Telegram CEO Pavel Durov for the charges of enabling a bunch of bad stuff, child exploitation, child sexual abuse material, terrorism conversations, all the things? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think, first of all, when people in the tech community in the US complain about COSA, I say, well, wait until we make it criminal. Right now, it's
Mm-hmm.
only civil.
Right.
Right?
Oh, man.
So,
Yeah.
so I think it's the reality of the tension between protecting children and national security and the stability of democracies versus anonymity.
Mm-hmm.
And anonymity, at least from a US perspective, is not part of the US Constitution. We have First Amendment rights. We have a right from legal search and seizure, but we don't have anonymity rights. I can't
Mm-hmm.
sit in a dark, house with my windows covered with a gun and shoot people and say, you can't come and get me because I have a
Mm-hmm.
right to be anonymous, right?
Right.
Anonymity is not a right in this country. Having the ability to protect your privacy is important, and encryption, but I don't
Mm-hmm.
think you should have a right for end-to-end unbreakable encryption. I think law enforcement should have access and the ability to access that for national
Yeah.
security and child protection issues.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have somebody who is putting national security of a country like France and child
Mm-hmm.
protection that's happening in France
Mm-hmm.
over, the protecting their citizens, I think
Mm-hmm.
they should be held accountable for that.
Yeah. And so just because I'm on an encrypted app doesn't mean that I can do illegal things because no one can track it.
Well, yeah, and then you shouldn't be able to facilitate that, right? I mean,
Right. So
again,
one up. Yeah.
it's the
Yeah.
facilitation of
Right.
the illegal activity. And I'm not saying
Yes.
that they have to monitor, like we have issues here with the common carriers, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
not responsible to monitor all the calls. But
Mm-hmm.
if the FBI wants to wiretap a phone,
Mm-hmm.
they have the ability to do that at the head end.
So Telegram is end-to-end encrypted. Does that mean that they themselves can't track the
That's right.
conversation?
Yes.
Okay. So they don't know what's going
They
on.
don't know. It's hear no evil, see no evil, talk no evil,
Right.
philosophy,
Mm-hmm.
and which completely puts communications in the dark that no one
Mm-hmm.
can see. So, and they're like, well, I mean, it's what WhatsApp just did, right? It's what Facebook just did with WhatsApp.
Yeah.
That was an
Right.
unbreakable end-to-end encryption. And now they're going to say, well, we can't monitor. So NCMEC numbers, that's why NCMEC strongly opposes that, National Center for
Mm-hmm.
Exploited Children,
Mm-hmm.
because all of a sudden you have a whole mechanism. And then if you look at even the illegal drug sales that are
Mm-hmm.
happening on these websites, and I have a video I could send you, they push you off of, Instagram to WhatsApp,
Right.
and then
Right.
have the
Right.
communication on WhatsApp for the final
Right.
sale. And
Yep.
and you're able to watch this whole flow, and then
Mm-hmm.
all it goes dark. And
Yeah.
I think that is a huge problem from a law enforcement standpoint.
Mm-hmm. And especially that children and adults can communicate in an encrypted manner. And that's where, there's a lot of illegal stuff that can be done in those type of communications. But here I'm most worried about our kids.
Yeah, I want to be
And
clear about
yeah,
encrypted
yeah.
communications and unbreakable end-to-end encryption. Those are
Okay.
two
Yeah, sure.
different types of things.
Okay.
And they get
Thank you.
mixed up, I think, on purpose by those on the other side. So I
Yeah.
believe in strong encryption, right? I like that when I send emails now, they're encrypted and someone just can't pick my emails off the open web. Or when I
Mm-hmm.
use a cell phone now, back in the old days when it was analog, people could listen into your cell phones, right? Now
Mm-hmm.
it's encrypted from my phone to
Okay.
yours, right? So
Yeah.
encryption in of itself for banking records and a whole host of other things, medical records. Yes, you want encryption to be strong, but there
Yeah.
is somewhat of a trade-off when it's unbreakable.
Right.
And what happens with the other side does is they'll say, well, you want your financial bank information, that all of a sudden you want that to be encrypted. The answer is yes.
Mm-hmm.
But I can tell you that law enforcement can go to the bank and get it unencrypted, right? They can track and have
Mm-hmm.
access to the deals that were
Mm-hmm.
made for money laundering purposes, right? For illegal
So,
transactions. And so
yeah.
the communication's encrypted, which is fine. It's what happens at the either end. Is there a mechanism or a way to unencrypt it in order to protect people from harm?
So why would these social media platforms or these tech companies allow for messaging apps that are unbreakable and end-to-end encrypted? Why wouldn't they just use regular encryption?
Because it's a selling point.
Mm-hmm.
You can
Privacy.
sell it. You
Mm-hmm.
say, I mean, you see that in the conversations and look at, Apple's ads. We're all about privacy.
Yeah.
This is the best ads. I mean, look at, Telegraph and how popular it was because it was unbreakable. The problem is
Mm-hmm.
that that's why it's used by criminals. It's a selling point
Selling point and removes liability
and
from the
removes
platform.
liability. Absolutely
Yeah.
correct. It's a
Okay.
twofer.
Yeah. Twofer. God. Okay. What's it going to take to change all this? Obviously, we want to put kids first, but it's more than that. Like these companies are obviously harming kids for profit, for their benefit. So, what do we have legislation that could potentially fix the situation that we're in?
Yeah, I mean, nothing's going to be 100%. So we always have to
Yeah.
start off with that, right? There's always going
Right.
to be problems. We're always going to have to improve. And
Mm-hmm.
legislation in of itself isn't going to fix all these problems, but it's
Mm-hmm.
important to have the legal foundation to hold these sites accountable for
Mm-hmm.
their conduct. And I think
Yeah.
that's what why we're strong supporters of the Kids Online Safety Act, KOSA, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a conduct bill. It's not a content bill.
Mm-hmm.
The TikTok divestiture bill. It's a conduct bill, not a content bill. And so safety by design legislation, and then broader privacy bills that are out there to help protect the collection and use of information. I do have some strong concerns about the COPPA 2.0 that was in the
Mm-hmm.
Senate. I've always had some concerns about it,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that with the advent of AI, I think the COPPA
Mm-hmm.
2.0 is actually more harmful than good. I'm happy to talk about that as
Interesting.
well.
Yeah, we can do that separately. I have an interview with Dawn Hawkins next week at Nicosia, and I know she
Yes.
feels similarly. So let's follow back up on that because I'm very curious about that. And COSA is something I've been focusing on a lot. I have tons of interviews that have come out and are coming out about COSA, kind of talking about the headlines around it, talking about scenarios like if COSA was passed, what differences would I see in my child's feeds or social media activities? So there's a lot there already for parents. And you mentioned that legislation isn't going to fix all the problems. And so parents really have a responsibility to get educated and make safe decisions in our home and do our best with the tools we have available to protect our kids. So what advice do you have for parents with knowing we don't currently have any new legislation to help us out? So how do we handle this when it comes to social media access?
Well, I think part of it is making sure your children understand that what they're putting online is there forever.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing is private.
Mhm.
Even in and then encryption, if I can see it on my phone, I can take a picture of it and then send it around because I'm on the
Mhm.
other end of the encryption, right?
Yep. Mhm.
So there is never, nothing is ever completely in images can go away. They run
Mhm.
that risk. I think there's a lot of groups out there that have great educational tools for parents. NCMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, have
Mhm.
free tools. Donna Rice, Hughes, Enough is Enough. They have a lot of 101 on child safety. So there's a
Mhm.
lot of organizations for free advice of how to protect your kid. There's technologies out there that are important that to be used that are off the shelf. It just takes a parent to know where these products and services are. And that's the hard
Mhm.
part. I mean, I always
Mhm.
ask parents, how many of you use the V chip in your on your television,
Mhm.
which is mandated by Congress, the V
Oh,
chip.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah, that's part of the problem. It's the parental controls on your
Oh,
television is controlled by what's known as the V chip.
okay.
And so, and then now satellite, like, the cable companies now have as part like parental controls on there, but
Yes.
most
Okay.
parents don't use the parental controls.
Mhm.
And they're available for parents to use. And that's been always been the problem with some of the parental controls. That is why I think it would be important for tech companies to have the parental controls on and have the
Mhm.
parents or the users have to turn them off. That
Yes.
way it's easier for parents to be able to, they give their kids a phone, they know that the tools are already on to help
Mhm.
protect them. And then having third party entities have the ability to provide those tools.
I've heard about some legislation, maybe from John Pizzaro at Raven, that might be coming next year that gives more control to the like device ID level of the phone, so the device knows how old the user is and doesn't allow certain things to be downloaded if they're not, say, 13 for social media.
Yeah, I mean, you have to be careful with that because that's, Meta has been pushing that, right? Well,
Okay.
it should be the app stores that should be the parental control center
Yes.
area. And the answer
Yeah.
is that's one, but also has to fall onto the
Hmm.
social networking sites themselves.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
it can't be just, oh, we're just going to push this all on Google and Apple
Hmm.
and the app stores to be the
Hmm.
parental control, the parental controls and the age
Hmm.
verification agents. But
Yeah.
the tool is there to be used, and there should be a mechanism, what we would call read and respond to
Hmm.
these types of age verification technologies that will
Hmm.
provide important protections for children.
And for now, I listeners know I like the Bark phone
Mhm.
product because parents have complete control over what their kids can download, and it does allow for social media if you want to add it at some point. My last question, I think, before you tell me a little bit more about your work, I'm of the mind that kids don't need social media, and that the feeling of being left out is better than the harms that they'll be introduced to on social media. So, how do you feel? Do you feel that kids need to have access to social media at some point?
It's a tough question, to be honest,
I
because
know.
it depends on what type of social media you're talking about, right?
Mhm.
Because that's a very broad definition. I
Yeah.
do think that Instagrams and the TikToks and other sites,
Mhm.
I do think they create tremendous amount of harm, and I really do think there should be the kids should not be on them
Yeah.
up to a certain age.
Okay.
I do love the idea of schools not allowing kids to be on their phones during the day. I never understood
Yeah.
why that was necessary. I think
Yeah.
the parents are a big part of the problem because they're helicopter parents and they want to
Mhm.
know 24/7 where their kids are. I think
Mhm.
I like John Hates philosophy. I'm a
Yeah.
follower of his on a lot of these issues. He's right. I've never tracked my kids. It's this
Mhm.
to me, it's weird, but I have a lot of people I know do it, even with their adult kids. And I just think that's
Right.
kind of weird.
I wonder what we're yeah, I agree, and I wonder because kids and we'll close out in a second, but kids are being tracked through watches from, like, 4 or 5, 6 years old, and they know that they're being tracked, and they so what is that gonna do to them? How is that going to help or harm their development and their autonomy and independence as an adult? I just don't doesn't feel right. They're never alone. They're
Yeah.
never right?
And
I don't get
you
it.
have to do a little bit of trust. with
Yeah.
kids, which is hard. I mean,
Yeah.
my son's 21 years old, drove
Yeah.
to college for the first time, and I'm still worried. I was like, when
I
I
know.
was 21, I was driving. Why do I look at it so differently?
Yeah. I know.
And so that as a parent, it's always how you're going to feel. But sometimes you just, have to take a deep breath, and let it go.
Yeah.
But one area that I think gets completely overlooked in a lot of the conversations is the
Mhm.
fintech world and the
Mm.
use of Venmo and Cash App
Mm.
and these other types of mechanisms for digital currencies and the amount of information that's being collected that will fall outside of any privacy legislation because fintech falls under what is known as Gramm-Leach-Bliley, which is the financial privacy law, which has a
Mm.
whole different set of requirements that were designed for adults and not kids. And now
Mhm.
that kids are using Cash App and Venmo and all these other different type of digital fintech wallets, digital wallets,
Mhm. Mhm.
they're being tracked at a very early age and their spending habits. And there's no rules around the collection and use of that information. And there is no ability to opt out of affiliate sharing when
Mm.
under Gramm-Leach-Bliley. And I think that's an issue that needs to be looked at more carefully.
Okay, let's follow up on that. Is there any final advice you have for parents related to social media?
Yeah, I think it's really important to talk to your kids about what they're doing online and have those conversations. Just
Mhm.
like you talk to your kids before you give them the keys to the car about don't
Mhm.
drink and drive, be aware, don't text. All these conversations that we have for the physical world, we need to have
Mhm.
those conversations. But I am more worried about the kids who don't have strong parents or have no parents at all. Kids in foster care, the homeless, kids who are highly at risk and they don't have adults around. And I think too often in these conversations where you have people on the other side of the issue say, well, it's the parents' responsibility. Yes,
Mhm.
parents do have a responsibility, but what about the kids who just don't have parents? And those are the vulnerable kids that I feel we need to think about in these conversations more so than we have in the past.
Thank you for bringing that up. And I was just talking about foster kids this morning at the coffee shop with the girl behind the counter because she works with foster kids. And I had heard recently that in some foster care systems, the foster parent can't remove phones from the children. So they can have them in their room all night. And the parent, it's like, I can't do anything about it. They have to have it with them. And so that's creating a lot of harm. And there's just a lot of barriers to protection for children in those positions. And so we need the legislation to add some safety.
Absolutely. Those are the children I worry about that just don't have strong parents and parenting. And we need to make sure that the social networking sites have the protections in place and are legally required to
Mhm.
do safety by design.
Yeah. Okay, Rick, you are a warrior in this fight for kids, and I really am grateful for you. Can listeners connect with you somewhere and learn more about your work?
I do all my posting on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So if you want to know anything about issues that I work on, from ICANN with issues and who is to child safety, it's all
Mhm.
there. So you can find all my postings and my ramblings on LinkedIn.
Okay. Thank you, Rick. And let's follow up with another conversation about any of the topics that we didn't get to dive into today. There's so much there.
Absolutely. And thank you, Nikki, again for having me. I am a big fan of what you're doing and please keep
Thank
it
you.
up.
Thank you so much, Rick. I appreciate you.
All right.